Hello, students. This is Ann Babson. This is the sixth, and for at least this semester, the last video that I am making for Travel French. It is simply called The Train, the Plane, and the Bus, Getting Around French Using Transportation Modes. There's a vocabulary for everything that a person can do in a culture, and traveling in different modes of transportation is a cultural decision as well as a logistical decision. And I'm going to teach you some words that might be helpful to you and a few other things along the way. Of course, travel generally is disorienting, even if everyone speaks your language in the airport. It's confusing to figure out where to go, what piece of paper they want to see, things like this, what time you need to be at any given place. But it becomes, of course, even more disorienting when you're not sure what a word means on a sign or from a person in uniform, a word that they say. So this video is to help give you peace of mind. As you know, most international airports speak in English in some places and also have signs somewhere in many international airports that are in English. So you really don't have to worry about this as a whole, but I still think having command over certain words will help you feel like you're in control of your literal destination. And yes, as I say, most airports and train stations and bus stations have some help available in English. It's better to know basic vocabulary for travel. So let's start with some train vocabulary. Here's some words that'll help you get literally on the right track. So here is some basic train vocabulary. The place where you go to get the train, the station, is called la gare. Obviously, the word train, if it were written, you would recognize. It's pronounced in French, le train. And if you're talking about the car, they call it le wagon, like wagon, but they pronounce it like with a V, le wagon. And then we would say, which track does the train depart from? La voie. La voie is how you say the thing that is not the track exactly, but the place you go catch the train on a platform. And then if you have a connection, which sometimes if you're going to a small town, say in Switzerland, from Paris, you really may need to change trains on your way to the specific small town that you're going to. When you are changing trains either in the metro or indeed in the French rail system, it's the spot of the change is le correspondance. And then the reserved seat could either be called le siège or la place réservée ou non réservée. Most train seats in the French system, if you're going to not be having a place to sleep on the train, specifically formal place to sleep, like a bed of some kind, you really normally don't have a reserved place. If you're riding in first class on the TGV, you may. But even there, that's hit and miss. So, le siège or la place réservée. And then le wagon restaurant is the dining car. More on that later. Whatever you're riding, you're going to need a ticket for it. And the word for a ticket is un billet. Un billet. So that would be un billet d'avion if it's an airplane, un billet de train if it is a train, and un billet d'autocar if you are taking a bus across a border of some kind, a longer, more luxurious bus rather than a bus around town. And billet aller-retour is a round-trip ticket. Aller-retour really means to go, to go, return. And billet aller simple means one way. And there's also, of course, un pass URL. The Metro has a system of passes as well. This video doesn't cover specifics for that. It may be that you need a bed on the train, and I just want to explain the differences between things. Most people who are traveling and are young probably don't want to pay the price for un wagon-lit, which is, seriously, if you've ever seen North by Northwest, the nicer wagon-lit, while you wouldn't call it utterly luxurious, and there's no promise of Cary Grant in the cabin with you there, or even Marie Saint, looks approximately like that. Small beds in a private room for usually two people, or you might be able to get some kind of arrangement for a family. Often, though, in the European railway system, there are things called couchettes, which are like little places to sleep. And what I've given you a photo of is what it looks like generally. They're usually 4 or in some cases 6, depending on the train, beds that are kind of stacked on top of each other. They are more like a cot. They are just comfortable enough that you don't hate your life for being on them, but I've personally found them hard to sleep on, not because they're uncomfortable, but because it's such a disorienting experience to be on a train and trying to sleep in the dark with strangers. There are people who do it, and they're very well rested when they get to their destination. It's obviously the less expensive option, and it may make sense for you in your trip, particularly if you're the kind of person who can go to sleep anywhere. And I'm going to tell you a very sad story about food on French trains. There have always been, if you were in just taking a relatively comparatively short train ride from, say, Paris to Lyon, you could go get yourself at the bar. In fact, it is called Le Bar. Some snacks. Sometimes they had like a trolley that would roll down the aisle, and you could get yourself a packet of cookies if you wanted and a cup of tea, much like the trains in England. And if you're willing to pay a little money, you could have an extraordinary experience, if not the absolute hands down best meal of your entire life. A very real wagon restaurant, which had a full 3-course meal, waiters with bow ties, plenty of good wine and champagne, would serve you a full meal while you are, say, zooming through the Belgian countryside. When I was a teenager, my family took such a trip, and I got to tell you, I remember it now as if it were yesterday. It was so memorable. The food was quite good. The waiters were attentive and serious about their jobs. And the food, while again, not the best I've ever tasted in my life, was certainly at a very nice level of French cuisine. And a person could have the view of Europe while having such a formal meal. During the pandemic, it was completely unsafe to continue this custom, you may imagine. There was no way to have people with their masks off, no barriers, in a country that needed to wear masks. It just wasn't feasible to have a train ride where this was a safe thing to do in the middle of COVID. and very reasonably, they shut it down. What they have put back up is not the old school trains of yore with the wagon restaurant that are more formal. What you get is something more like even a very pretentious snack, but it's more of a snack. It's more like the best airplane food you could imagine, but it's not served to you like a full meal. It's more like these little squares of things that you can see in this photograph. I would tell you that if you're hungry, that's a good thing to do. You can also bring food on the train. I mean, I have, for instance, I have another memory of eating on a train, which was quite lovely. I was on a all local stops kind of train through the Swiss Alps, and all I had were some crackers and some apples and a big bottle of water. But I had the most delightful view of some of the prettiest scenery on earth. And the apples were fresh, sweet, and the crackers were crunchy. And I remember that particular trip with fondness, though it wasn't elegant at all, just delightful. So the vocabulary here would be le bar, or le wagon bar, which means bar wagon, the place where you can get in to have that. And there is probably a wagon restaurant if you were on the TGV, which is the train grande vitesse, the very rapid bullet train. But again, you're getting these little snacks in these little boxes like you see here. All right, so here's some important additional vocabulary you would want to have. Un arrêt is a stop. And composter son billet means get one's tickets punched, but a punch might not be done with like a poinçon is what they used to call it, those ticket punchers that put a hole punch in what you're doing. There are options if you have a paper ticket, and fewer people do. Just as in the airport today, you might have an electronic ticket that is on your phone. If you have a paper ticket, there might be a machine you stick it under, and an ink stamp goes down on it, and that's called composter son billet. Before you get on a train, you're generally supposed to sort of start the ticket, as it were, in some fashion. Because they worry that some tickets have a long life, but people might recycle them in some way if they didn't get what the French call contrôlé, in other words, stopped by somebody who checks tickets. If you're asked to composter votre billet, what that means is they're asking you to get some kind of probably ink stamp on a physical ticket, or to flash your ticket on something that will mark it as beginning your travel. And then you will see a variety of abbreviations, and I wanted to translate them for you because everyone acts like you should already know what they are, and there's no reason why you would. SNCF, la SNCF is la Société Nationale de Chemin de Fer, which means the National Railway Society. Those are all the trains that are run specifically by the French Governmental Transportation Agency. And the TGV, train grande vitesse, are the bullet trains that are international. They rarely just stay within one country. They might go, say, from Berlin to Paris and go much faster than a regular train. The RATP, which when I thought I was very funny, I was 19 years old, and I called that RATP. But le RATP is the subway and bus system of Paris, la métro and les autobus. And I honestly don't remember what all those letters stand for, except to say that P is for Paris, Paris. And I want to explain l'autobus is the translation that Google Translate would give someone for a bus. And it would be a correct translation, except it's not what you usually mean that you want if you're traveling anywhere outside of a single city. The autobus is a term that means a municipal bus, and it generally goes on short distances. It's usually used by regular bus lines, and city governments are the ones who pay for the bus to be operated. You probably have to have a metro ticket to use these in some fashion if you're in Paris. L'autocar means a bus, but it means more like a more luxurious bus, not quite, rock star band bus, but something with a bathroom on the bus, something with comfortable upholstered seats, and a smoother ride because it's bigger, and a place where you could put your luggage under the bus cabin. These buses tend to go between cities in Europe. They are generally run not by the city government. They are run by private enterprise of some kind. And the companies, like if you're familiar with the transportation company Van Hool, which is a Dutch company, sometimes pronounced Van Hool, like Oel instead of Ol, but I think the Dutch say Van Ol. They're super comfy seat buses. And you have to buy a ticket from a private organization. You can't go to the train station and get yourself a bus ticket. You have to perhaps ask a hotel clerk how you get a bus, an autocar, between one destination and another. There are also, of course, tourist buses, and the ones that take you to a place like Giverny or Versailles from Paris probably fall into the second category rather than the first. And this, I just wanted to show you a picture. An autobus is kind of, I'm not going to call it rinky-dink. It works just fine for what it's supposed to do. But it looks just like a public bus, whereas l'autocar looks like it's a nicer quality bus. And finally, I want to give you some vocabulary for airports, which will come in handy. And so here I've written l'avion, which means airplane, le vol, the flight, and la douane, which means customs. And the place where one checks one's bag is called usually le guichet. Occasionally you'll hear something that sounds like counter, le comptoir. And often, as you know, there are people here that could speak some English to you. And they will tell you where your flight is going. And you would check your bags here. I think you can recognize this from American travel only. You wouldn't have had to travel overseas to understand this function of this. And here is some basic vocabulary. Le vol is the flight. La porte is the gate. Un agent or une agente is somebody in a uniform for an airline company who is checking your bags, telling you what gate to go to, taking your ticket. All of those people are un agent or une agente. And then your seatbelt is la ceinture de sécurité. Départ are departures, and arrivée are arrivals. You've got the boards for that. And then there is la douane and contrôle des passeports. La douane is a customs check. They call it as one thing. Customs, we make it plural. They call it one thing, la douane. And contrôle des passeports means that's a place where you have to show your passport. And here are a few things you might want to know how to say to the douanier. Voici mon passeport means here is my passport. Je suis ici, or nous sommes ici, which means I am here or we are here. En vacances. En vacances means on vacation. And that way people are less likely to think you're there to cut some kind of business deal. And if you want to say you have nothing to declare, je n'ai rien à déclarer. Je n'ai rien à déclarer. One more time. Je n'ai rien à déclarer. And if somebody's like, well, are you here to sell this stuff? I saw a kid when I was going to university. He brought in several big boxes of cassette tapes. And he didn't speak really any French, but he too was beginning a language immersion program. And I stuck around just because I wanted to make sure he didn't get arrested for just looking like a hippie, which he totally did. So the douanier said, where are you planning on selling these cassettes, basically? And I was able to say these words for him. Ce sont ses effets personnels. And if you were saying it about yourself, ce sont mes effets, my personal effects, mes effets personnels, my personal belongings. And when he heard that, he was like, okay, because honestly, these look like used cassettes. But you'd want to have some vocabulary like that. Truthfully, French customs is usually not a place where people are in a lot of trouble at any time coming from the United States, but you'd still want to have some vocabulary. So with all of that, I feel like the students in the center of the aisle, and I want to say I wish you bon voyage. I hope you have a wonderful time on your trips to France. I think that you will find so many wonderful discoveries of things that might delight you in a country that has made sure that its culture has an aesthetic sense and a sense of what they call joie de vivre, which is the joy of living. So I wish you the joy of living. Thank you so much for your time and attention.